Hi there, I'm Chris Chapwanyo and welcome to another discussion. Today we're going to be looking at the gas to energy project as well as the offshore oil and gas development. And joining us in that conversation today, we have our Deakin, co-director at America's Market Intelligence Energy Practice, Joel Bhagwandin, who's a financial analyst and columnist, and Christopher Ram, attorney at law, as well as a columnist, a frequent commentator on a number of issues, and of course, chartered accountant. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us. Good day. How are you?
Good, good. How are you?
Good, good. Thank you for having me on this panel, this very distinguished panel, Chris.
Great. Thank you all for joining us. So let's get right into it. We've been hearing quite a lot about the gas to energy project. Of course, the electricity sector in Guyana, it's undiversified, expensive, unreliable. We know that we generate electricity right now from heavy fuel oil with a mixture of diesel. And from as far back as any one of us here living in Guyana could remember, we've had issues as it relates to electricity cost, reliability, and so on. So, with the advent of bringing a pipeline to shore to utilize some of the associated gas, we've been hearing that this is expected to cut electricity costs by more than half. And then there are a number of spin off benefits that we expect to see from this project. So let us start off first by just a quick view from each of you on the prospect of moving forward with this, what is supposed to be a transformational project.
Recall, Chris, that I would have participated some time ago on a previous program, on a previous webinar like this, where we would have discussed to some extent the same subject matter. And my friend and colleague Arthur was also on that panel. And you would have carried some of my articles where I wrote about the potential benefits of the gas to shore. Now, without making it too technical, because I'm cognizant of time and that this is a very short discussion, and I want to delve straight into the potential benefits of the gas to shore in terms of cheaper energy. What does cheaper energy means for us as a country, and especially now within the context of what is happening globally in the sense of rising cost of living, the war in Ukraine, Russia and Ukraine, and the impact on all these global eventualities on us here in Guyana, in this small country in South America, that we're feeling it. What does it mean within those contexts? So, for too long, we have had the highest energy cost within perhaps this Western hemisphere. And we've also had reliability issues. Now, when you speak with the private sector over and over and reports after reports complain about the cost of energy and the lack of competitiveness of the country. Now, this is a major contributor to the lack of competitiveness of the private sector and by extension the country. And therefore, one of the main benefits of cheaper energy and reliable energy is to improve a more competitive economy, driving growth, more expansion in the manufacturing sector, becoming more attractive to investments, foreign direct investments within the manufacturing sector, and driving also a heavy industrialized economy. And when you look at where the policymakers are taking the country in terms of their development plans, one of the things that is particularly of interest to me is that development is not only focused in a central zone. Development is now being focused regionally, where government wants to concentrate certain type of investments in certain regions to create employment and to create job opportunities. So that's the first benefit in terms of industrialization, a more competitive manufacturing sector. Having a more competitive manufacturing sector means you're going to have stronger exports, right? For example, we produce we produce all sorts of raw materials, and we export raw materials, and then we import back the finished goods. For example, we produce sugar, but the manufacturing companies that we have here, Banks, DIH, DDL, and the ice cream companies, they can't use the sugar that we produce in their product. They still have to import refined sugar. And the same can be said for many other sectors operating within the manufacturing sector, right? And so that is what this would help us. It will also help us to save our import bill. Our fuel import bill, for example, is one of the biggest bill. 500 million, half a billion US dollars is our fuel imports. Now, if we could have benefit from cheaper energy, attract more investments, and produce more of the goods that we need to consume, and move our trade balance position from a net deficit position to to a surplus position, that would mean you have a stronger macro stability framework. Having a stronger macro stability framework, when a country is in such a position, you can better guard against external shocks such as the one we're experiencing right now with shortage of wheat and all kinds of different other commodities. So those are some of the key benefits. In terms of the household, cheaper energy means not only improving balance sheet growth for companies, large companies, but it means you're putting more disposable income in householders, right? More disposable income also drives growth and create opportunities in 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 many different forms. So
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 you've listed some key benefits there, Joel. So I'm gonna come right back to you and get some initial comments from the other panelists. I know we have a lot of ground to cover. Arthur, you've been following this for quite some time. Coming from America's Market Intelligence, you study and analyze these types of projects around the world. And as you've been following the progress of this, you've shared in terms of previous comments your view that this could potentially benefit Guyana significantly. Where are you now in terms of your projections and views as it relates to the rollout of this project?
Yeah, thank you, Chris. I think Joel covered the benefits of the project very well. I think we're at a spot where we need to move forward with this project, and I know that there's negotiations going on between the government and Exxon on the price of the gas, who's going to build the actual power plants. I think it was determined that Exxon is going to build the pipeline, but there still needs to be an RFP, a request for a proposal for who's going to build the power plant and the liquids facility to handle all of this. I think that at this point in time where we are in terms of energy security around the world, it is more important than ever to have this gas to shore plant come online as quickly, as safely as possible, right? I think that there is still there's no clarity on the amount of gas that's been found in the Starbuck block. There's estimates, 20% of it is supposed to be associated gas, but I think we need more concrete figures to know exactly what is realistic in terms of the generation capacity of this power plant. There's 250 megawatts, but how much of the gas can be piped from the Liza one well to shore? I think we need more clarity on that, and I think this needs to be done quick. As long as we stay within the environmental guidelines, as long as there's benefits for both the companies constructing these projects as well as the people, which most importantly should be the ones that benefit from lower costs. Manufacturing facilities are also going to benefit tremendously. But I think we're at a point in time where we've hit somewhat of an inflection point, and we need to move forward with this project.
There's no question that in the current environment, and no pun intended, any country should be looking at reducing its electricity generation costs as well as reducing its carbon footprint. As an intermediate product and project, there's no question that having regard to what we now have as a comparator, then the issue of utilizing natural gas is answers both of those questions. It's not necessarily the long-term solution, but in terms of an energy mix, you cannot rule out. After all, we have it. We just can't pretend we don't have it. Um, I sometimes, so there's no question that I'm in favor of it. I don't see how you could not be in favor of it. Once you're generating, you exploring and producing um, petroleum, and there's associated gas. The time when we might have non-associated gas as defined under the contract is yet to come. We hear things like, oh, it's going to cut electricity costs by half. Cut it when? We don't know. We hear how much it's going to cost. How much we don't know. Now, these are things, as you know, as panelists know, I am one of the founder members of Article 13. It's a civil society organization that takes its name and inspiration from the Constitution of Guyana. That requires full participation by all stakeholders. And we hear about transformational. Well, you can't get much more, then at least get that type of information. You know, raising questions about a project is not being anti a project. It is saying, let us have a more informed discussion. I want to give you a quick example. We heard about the Myla Falls project, and you hear people talking, oh, it's going to reduce electricity costs, or it's going to cost us 7.70%. Now, what persons may not have noticed, it says over the average life of the project. We don't know what the cost is going to be in the initial years. And we have this kind of model in the Burgess Bridge, where the cost can be prohibitively expensive. So we've got to address that issue. We've also got to address the issue of this contract. This gas to shore project is part of the 2016 petroleum agreement between the government of Guyana and the three oil contractors. That agreement provides for certain rights and responsibilities. Now, the first call on associated gas goes to the contractor. Now, the contractor is a triumvirate, Hess, CNOOC, and ESSO. Again, we don't know what are the arrangements. So, in speaking about the project, we can all say yes, it certainly has benefits. The devil, as they say, is in the details.
Let's try to talk about some of these things. Let's start with the cost, which we know last I've seen hovers somewhere around 900 million to 1 billion US dollars. A project of this magnitude, and this question now is open to the panel, Arthur having studied similar projects elsewhere, 900 million US price tag thereabouts. Where does this fall in comparison to other projects that are similar?
I honestly haven't studied a similar project to this one in the region, but the thing is that I think the price is very accurate based on what it's going to bring to Guyana and the scale of the project, the size of the project, and it's not just the reduction of prices in energy, but it's all the value added industries that are going to benefit from this: petrochemicals, fertilizers, etc. And I think in theory, it's not just going to be the Liza 1 well that's going to be connected to this gas to shore plant, but several other wells as well, leading to increased generation, increased value added production. I personally can't comment on the price tag because I haven't looked at similar projects elsewhere, but I can say that in terms of the propositions and the benefits that the projects are going to bring, it does appear to make a lot of sense.
I want to respond to that by saying that all of the questions and concerns raised by Chris there is merit in those if you want to do a really thorough analysis. But in all fairness, we have to we have to say that this particular project and many other projects, like for example the same Nyla project that Chris referenced, are still not finalized, and therefore those details cannot be available, and therefore we cannot perform an informed evidence-based analysis. So the analysis that I have done and the analysis that Arthur has done in the past and the commentaries that Chris has done, has published in his writings and on different forums are based on the limited information that are put in the public domain, and we can only take that and extrapolate other information and other data based on what we know about different variables. And so therefore, none of us on this panel is in a position to analyze the risks and the mitigation strategies that are associated with this project. In terms of the cost for the project and the benefit, right? It's purely a context for me. It's a contextual analysis or an extrapolatory analysis. Now, what that cost represents, it represents just about 20% of our GDP. And that project, which is a mega project so far on the public investment side, is one of the largest we've ever had in this country. We've never undertaken such a massive investment, right? And from where I sit in the private sector and in different portfolios, and I can say that I am aware that this project is going through a process right now. It's going through an RFP process, and there are many companies, international companies, consortiums have been formed. Many technical proposals have been submitted to be part of this project, to bring it to manifestation. So we are not on this panel to make any conclusive analysis in terms of what the precise cost would be and what the precise benefit would be. We could only do so, contextually.
So I want to add that sometime in the latter part, I believe, of last year, the task force, the group responsible for the execution of this project, they had an engagement at the Arthur Chung facility here on the Lower East Coast, just outside of Georgetown. And at that forum, a number of studies and documents were shared with media. And I believe that these would have been out there too in the public domain. So you're looking at about 8 documents that includes the feasibility study that was done. There's a Japan Corporation Center Petroleum document that was also shared looking at the study. Brugman also had an update on the expansion study for the final revised report. K&M advisories, that study too was shared. And a number of these studies too were done and executed by the previous administration, many of which too would have been out there in the public domain. And so I think that there is never a point that we're going to reach where we have enough information or too much information. There is always need for more. But let's look at the information that is available to us. And coming back to you, Chris, you indicated, look, yes, less than 50% we're going to be paying for power. Going forward, when this happens, the question is when. Considering that this is a reality and this does come to fruition, what kind of impact do you think this could potentially have on Guyana?
The only study that really matters is the study that is referenced in Article 12 of the Petroleum Agreement, which talks about the contractor carrying out a feasibility study. So I'm not referring to any broad papers. And Chris, you know, I've tried to get information. We are still working out numbers, so it's not that like that they're there. I want to make sure that we observe the petroleum agreement. We don't compromise any one aspect because, for example, we do wish to move ahead. Of course, we wish to move ahead. Um, Lots of these things we would have liked to be there long ago. So that the issue is, when do we get? And as I said, I represent Article 13 as an organization. I embrace Article 13 of the Constitution. And you can say, Mr. Chapania, that there are 20 studies. So why can't we have a definitive one? Of course, the generation or cheap generation of electricity will have spin-off benefits. I heard us talking about value added. Well, maybe the best value added, in my view, would be if we start thinking about refinery, because that's where a country really gets the takeoff. Now, I know there were some concerns about risks and so on. There will always be risks.
And Chris, I don't think anyone would disagree with that, indeed. And you spoke about the Dutch disease. You spoke about the impact of the war in Ukraine. Gas prices, oil prices are going through the roof. We, in turn, importing this fuel to generate electricity means that potentially those costs will go up. We've seen that there is a reduction now to zero for the excise tax as it comes to fuel coming into the country. The Dutch disease, with we look at other countries closer to home, like Trinidad and Tobago, and many times you hear persons say, "Look, when we go into the supermarket and we see an item that is made in Guyana, it's more expensive than the exact same thing coming in from Trinidad and Tobago." Why? The cost to produce. With cheaper electricity, the question here is, what is the potential impact that could have on other industries as we talk about the Dutch disease that then helps us to not just focus on oil and gas, but to develop the other sectors, agriculture and food, of course, being primarily a key one.
Now, on the Dutch disease conversation and the concern that Chris raised about what is going to happen, are we going to be subject to the Dutch disease? Now, I want to say that I've been paying keen attention of the type of policies that the government has been implementing, the economic policies, the economic philosophy underpinning the economic policies that they're implementing. And not just the policies, but the programs, the initiatives, the development, the broader development agenda. And I could say with much satisfaction that the decisions and the policies being implemented, the programs that are being administered, especially Chris talk about the agriculture sector, what will happen to the other sectors. And Chris know this. Chris, like me, every year we do budget analysis, budget reviews, and we know what are these policies and programs. And we see that a heavy emphasis are being placed on the other sectors, especially um, on the agriculture sector and agro-processing. In fact, we've seen that the president has taken a lead to champion this at the regional level recently to position Guyana in terms of being a key player for food security in the region. So those must be acknowledged, and therefore, whether we want to predict if we're going to have the Dutch disease in the future, or we're going to be enduring the resource curse, the actions being taken today by the government will give the indication for that. And I could say, based on those actions, we are doing the right things. We are on the right path to avert the Dutch disease. We have seen policies being pursued, fiscal incentives being administered to rebuild the forestry sector, to rebuild the mining sector, not just the oil and gas sector, agriculture, services, right? So when to have this, to understand these issues and to discuss them thoroughly, we got to understand and appreciate the broader uh, challenges to our development and to our transformation. And you got to match the policies being implemented and the programs being implemented to solving those challenges. So we spoke of energy. We've elaborated on energy costs. Gas to shore is a solution for that. We're concerned about Dutch disease. I'm saying that there's sufficient progress being made and initiatives being implemented to avoid that from happening. Then we have another bigger problem. We have any country, oftentimes when commentators speak about Guyana in the context of an oil economy, we're being compared to Dubai and Singapore and so forth. Now, those let's take Singapore model for example. Singapore and Guyana, before both countries, I believe, got independence around the same time, and we were almost equal in terms of the state of our economy. In terms of a per capita income and GDP, we were almost the same on the same level. Today, Singapore is probably 10 times or 20 times richer than Guyana, right? And the reason for that, they don't have all the natural resources that we have, but what they have is people resources. The people resources. And because of our historic events that occurred in our political history, there was a time when we were, and Chris would know of this well more than me, when what Venezuela is experiencing right now. There was a time when we have experienced that, when we were a bankrupt economy. And so during this period of political instability and depression and so forth, people fled. People fled because of the lack of opportunities. And so to validate this to validate this argument that I'm putting forward here, if you look at our last labor force survey, the less than 5% of our labor force have an education at a tertiary level. Now, that tells you of the quality of our labor force. That tells you of the quality of education of our people. That means a small percentage of our people have a tertiary education. And so if we don't have a large mass of our people educated at that level, then that is a bigger deterrent to our development.
The average person out there, they're always asking themselves, look, we're hearing about all of this development. We're hearing about all of these revenues coming to the country. We're hearing about gas to shore. But how is it really going to benefit me? And that is what it really comes down to. Persons being able to connect the dots and to say, well, look, this is benefiting me. And I want us to switch gears a minute to talk about some of the actual projects that bring the revenue in that are now finding their way into the national budget, which in turn goes into capital projects and projects that are tangible. But when we look offshore, starting from Lisa Phase 1, we now have 3 projects approved. The third one being Payara, that FPSO has been built. That's going to come on stream 2024 thereabouts. And there's another project right now pending approval, Yellowtail. Of course, some hold the view that the developments are moving forward too rapidly, while others say, well, look, we need to do this. In fact, just today I saw a report from the International Institute for Sustainable Development, and they're pretty much saying that, look, rich countries, they need to slow down first and allow developing countries and poorer countries, countries like Guyana, to benefit from the oil and gas production. What is the view of the panelists as it relates to the offshore developments and the pace at which we're moving to approve these projects?
Yeah, I can jump in there. I think the pace of development is very on par with what's necessary. And what I mean by that is that right now, Guyana is probably the hottest frontier oil market in the world. There's a lot of investor interest. There's a lot of foreign investors interested in coming into Guyana and spending the capital. The country has to take advantage of that while it's hot, while oil prices are high, while there's a tight supply in oil across the globe, to really move forward with these projects in the most advantageous way possible. So, I think what the Institute for Sustainable Development stated in its report makes sense, allowing developing countries to benefit from the natural resources that they're, exploring at this point. I also think that in addition to that, countries with cleaner, high quality crude like Guyana like some areas of Brazil, should also be the ones that have precedence over dirtier fossil fuel countries. And then, of course, if there's authoritarian countries, countries like Russia, countries that have non-elected monarchies like Saudi Arabia, I think those countries, buyers across the globe should start thinking about diversifying their supply away from those countries. And we're seeing that a lot happen in Europe, but the pace of that needs to accelerate. In terms of the yellowtail developments, I think the big issue surrounding it is the insurance coverage. The government's concerned that if there's an oil spill, Exxon won't be able to cover it, but that's just false. Exxon and it's the company it's operating in Guyana, Esso, is more than enough well capitalized and contractually obligated to cover any kind of oil spill. Of course, it's good to have that on paper, and I think that's something that they're aligning on right now. But it shouldn't be a reason to delay the project much further. I think it has to move forward, and it has to move forward quickly.